Thank you very much. Thank you. And welcome to Stewart Lee's comedy vehicle with me, Stewart Lee. Later on I'm going to be talking to you about how my tragic and ultimately fatal addiction to various forms of lethal, illegal Class A drugs has helped me to overcome my previous dependence on born-again Christianity. I wrote that joke 20 years ago. At the time it seemed contentious. There's a kind of cliche of stand-up on television. People say that television eats up a stand-up comedian's material, but it doesn't if you just do loads of jokes that you also did on telly in the mid-90s. Tonight we're going to be talking about religion. Religion, oh, the hot potato, it looked delicious, but it burnt my mouth. Religion. If you are religious, don't worry, there are going to be jokes about religion tonight, but they probably won't be about your religion. They'll be about one of the other religions, you know, the ones which are wrong. I don't know if I'm the right person to be doing jokes about religion. In the last few months, I've become religious. I've started to believe in God and creationism and intelligent design. And the reason that I now believe in God and creationism and intelligent design is because of Professor Richard Dawkins. Because when I look at something as complex and intricate and beautiful as Professor Richard Dawkins, I don't think that could just have evolved by chance. Professor Richard Dawkins was put there by God to test us. Like fossils and facts. But when you think about it, right, most jokes about religion aren't really about doctrine or dogma. They're just about things like the language of religion. For example, last week, it didn't happen last week. I was walking through Heathrow Airport. This didn't happen, I made it up. And last week I was walking through Heathrow Airport. Well, I've never been there or been on a plane. I don't know what it is, but the rest of this joke is going to be involving planes, so I've set it in this place. So last week I was walking through Heathrow Airport and I saw an advert for one. I didn't see anything at all. I wasn't there, I saw nothing. I wasn't even there. I was walking through Heathrow Airport and I saw an advert for one of those evangelical groups they have now, and it said, "You won't get to heaven on a 737. I thought, no, I won't. But I will get to Reykjavik, where I understand there's a museum housing the world's largest collection of animal penises.
Here.
Most jokes about religion, as I say, they're not about dogma or doctrine. They're about things like the fact that people in religious garb look funny. There isn't anything that wouldn't be funnier were it not being carried out by someone dressed as a priest or a Buddhist or a rabbi. Take, for example, I want you to think of the funniest Laurel and Hardy sketch that you can think of, okay? And that is the routine where Stan is having a hot dog and Ollie is behind one of these photo booth things where you put your face through the hole, and Stan squeezes the hot dog and it flies out of the bun and it goes into Ollie's mouth. Remember that? Very funny. Now I want you to imagine that routine again, except this time Ollie is dressed in the robes of a bishop of the Greek Orthodox Church.
For me, Laurel and Hardy's seaside Greek Orthodox Church bishop with the sausage in his mouth is one of the great silent comedies. And I think it's amazing, it actually is Ollie wearing that Greek Orthodox Church bishop costume. Now today you'd have to do that with CGI or something. But back then, they really had to do it. They actually had to wear the actual costume. For me, I mean, that makes it even funnier.
Most jokes about religion, as I say, aren't about doctrine and dogma. They're about things like marketing. Catholicism, for example, I love the way that Catholicism combines a search for a profound spiritual truth in the universe, which is admirable, with a love of kind of inane seaside souvenir shop tat. You don't often see those two things working as a team. I was in the Vatican about 5 years ago while Pope John Paul II was still alive, and this is honestly true. In the Vatican Square, they were selling lollipops. You could buy lollipops about that big with the face of Pope John Paul II on them. You could buy a Pope John Paul II's face lollipop. I bought about 20. And I just thought, in the light of his death a few months later, I wondered whether sales of those lollipops went up or whether they went down. You know. Did good Catholics think, the Pope's just died? It would now seem inappropriate to lick a sugar effigy of his face. Or did they go, the Pope's just died, but what better way to commemorate his life than by licking a sugar effigy of his face? Eat that, swallow it, digest it, and pass out some kind of enchanted papal residue. I don't know if that would happen. I don't know if whatever spiritual properties the lollipops have, and we assume they must have some, I don't know if they would survive the digestive process. I'm neither medically nor theologically qualified to do anything other than speculate on that. But I did ask my local priest, I said to him, if you drink holy water and then you do a wee, is the wee then magic? And he said, no. That would be ridiculous. Well, there were lollipops of Pope John Paul II's face, and I don't think it's just because he was Pope. I think there may have been lollipops of that man's face anyway. Because he had a lickable face, didn't he? How did you think of his face? It's the lickable nice little lickable face he had. If you were a puppy and you saw that face, you would be compelled to lick it. He had a lickable little face, but the new Pope doesn't have a lickable face. Pope Benedict XVI is a very much more serious, harsh figure. I don't think you would make lollipops of the face of Pope Benedict XVI. I don't know how you would merchandise him. If I were called in to construct a way of merchandising the face of Pope Benedict XVI, I would issue it as a set of warning stickers. You could put on bottles of bleach to stop children drinking them. Whose face is that? Pope Benedict XVI. What does that mean? Poison. That's right. He's a very serious Pope. He's very hard-line. He's already managed to alienate the world's Muslims and Jews and native South Americans and homosexuals and AIDS researchers and human rights activists and doctors, and he's also reasserted the primacy of objective spiritual truth in the face of what he sees as a post-Enlightenment wave of secular rationalism. But on the positive side, Pope Benedict XVI has also reintroduced to formal papal wear an item of clothing which had been removed by Pope John Paul II in the 70s, and it's these. Pope Benedict XVI has reintroduced to formal papal wear the papal shoes. They're bright red leather, they're made by Prada, and he's brought these back in. So it's interesting to think that while he was alienating all the world's Muslims and Jews and native South Americans and homosexuals and AIDS researchers and human rights activists and doctors, he was wearing these shoes, which makes it seem rather delightful. Another thing he's done, Pope Benedict XVI, he's brought in a set of psychological profiling tests and questionnaires to try and determine whether potential applicants for the Catholic clergy are gay. And I'm not sure about how these work. I don't know if you can really determine someone's sexuality from just asking them questions about the kind of things they like, what they would like to wear. For example, it's very hard to draw any harsh conclusions from trivial and superficial things like that. But it does make me wonder, you know, when he was a young man in the Hitler Youth, did Pope Benedict XVI dream of becoming Pope? Or did he just dream of having a day job where he'd be allowed to wear these shoes? In short, was becoming Pope a means to an end?
Jim has fixed it for you, and you, and you, and you.
Now then, we have had a lovely letter from a lovely young man, Pope Benedict XVI, who writes, "Dear Jim, ever since I was a young boy in the Hitler Youth, I have been fascinated by the film The Wizard of Oz. My favourite character was Dorothy, and especially her red shoes. Today, as Pope, I have a pair of red shoes of my own, but can you, Jim, fix it for me to wear my red shoes and do a dance on the yellow brick road with all my priest friends? Ich bin ein Großkartoffel mit Zwiebeln, Pope Benedict XVI." Now then, how's about that then, Pope Benedict XVI? Your papal edict is my command, is it not?
Ja, bitte.
Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick, follow the yellow brick, follow the yellow brick road.
There's no place like Rome.
Last Sunday at 6:30, well, it wasn't last Sunday, it was 20 years ago this happened, okay? This was 20 years ago. Right. Last Sunday at 6:30, there was, I've moved it to now, so it sounds more current. But there was a knock at my door, and I went down and answered it, and there was one of those born-again Christian evangelists there. He said to me, "Sir, the answer is Jesus. Now what is the question?" And I said to him, "Is the question, for which role was Robert Powell nominated for a BAFTA?" And he said, "No, it isn't that." I said, "Can I have another guess?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Is the question, complete the name of this popular early 1970s item of hippie footwear, the blank sandal?" And he said, "No, it isn't that." I said, "Can I have another guess?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Is the question, complete the name?" He said, "You're staying, I notice, with the complete the name format." I said, "That's right, you initiated this combat. I reserve the right to choose weapons." I said, "Is the question, complete the name of this influential but little known late 1980s Chicago rock band, the Blank Lizard?" And he said, "I'll warn you, if you're considering recounting this conversation as some kind of stand-up routine, he said, I'll warn you that reference, the Blank Lizard, that has a very specific demographic reach." He said, "And while it may get a small laugh in a studio full of London hipsters, there's very little chance," he said, "that the majority of the viewers at home will get that reference. And for them, certainly," he said, "a routine which has been building nicely will take something of a dive at that point." I said to him, I'm not worried about that, because I think that if I refer to its failure, I may be able to milk some further laughs out of it. We've seen that happening, haven't we? You can probably at home, you can see it's happening mainly in that area. Over here, not so many laughs, but certainly the people over there. I don't know about you at home, but the people in this area very much enjoying the way I'm working the room. At this point, the evangelist said to me, I don't know if a primetime BBC 2 comedy slot is the time or the place to experiment with this level of self-indulgent improvisation. Now, of course, that line has created a tension in the room. It'd be quite hard to wrestle it back. The evangelist said, I did try to warn you. I said, what do you mean? You tried to warn me? Stop interrupting me. You are a semi-fictional character which I created. He said, that's right, semi-fictional. I have a basis, in fact, 20 years ago. I said, yeah, but you didn't behave like this. He said, no, I know, but my anger's been festering. I said, now what am I supposed to do? Look what you've done to me, I said to him. This routine over 20 years, we've worked on it together, you and me. We've built it up with a whole set of call and responses, and you improvising within certain carefully delineated parameters. Now look at where we are. We're in a position there is no escape. To all intents and purposes, what's happening now does not constitute entertainment. So luckily, in the edit, at this point, I can cut to a film item. We've had a lot of fun tonight, haven't we, laughing and sneering at trivial aspects of religion. But I think it's probably time to try and nail something serious. And what I want to talk about in the closing part of the programme is the idea of religious education. Faith schools, a place where religion touches our everyday lives. Now, the year before last, David Cameron said that he understood sharp-elbowed middle-class parents who lied about their religious beliefs to get their children into faith schools. And that's a typical kind of Cameron move, isn't it? I call him the weathercock, David the weathercock Cameron. I call him the weathercock for two reasons. One, because he spins, doesn't he, in the prevailing wind of public opinion, like a weathercock. And the second reason I call him the weathercock, David Cameron, the weathercock, is because I often wonder whether he's got a cock or not. Whether it'd just be like a little green shoot that would spring into action when one of his advisors decided it was time to call for a snap erection. Yeah, can you hear them? Can you hear the people booing and groaning? It was your favourite bit, wasn't it? The viewer at home went, I liked it when he mixed up the word election and erection. That was satire. But the whole idea of religious schools, it's a very strange one. What makes someone with a religious belief necessarily a good educator? The idea of religious education, it makes about as much sense as handing over to special interest religious groups all the nation's dog training schools.
This week on Preacher's Pet, we follow Miguel and his owner Stephen as they try out some of the government's new faith dog training schools.
Well, I don't want Miguel exposed to any extreme beliefs, but the local C of E dog school has got a great track record.
Morning, everybody. That's right. Can you come? Yep. Sit, everybody. You all sit. I'm not an idiot, you know. I do notice how many people suddenly rediscover their faith when they realise they've got a troublesome pooch.
Now, my evangelical dogs, who is this? Rowan Williams, Archbishop of Canterbury. Split worldwide Anglican communion. Kill the Archbishop! Kill the Archbishop! Bite his beard! Bite Archbishop beard! Nip his naughty nuts! Nip his nuts! That's right. Come on. Yeah, bite. Take him apart. Come on. Well, join in. Come on. Bite his face.
Miguel and Stephen's second choice requires them to familiarise themselves with the unorthodox dissenting sect of Quakerism.
This is how we make porridge.
While this is how you make chocolate.
Another day, another dog school.
For the next
We have to stop the sketch there, just at the point. He's about to go into an Islamic dog training school, and there was going to be little dogs being put in planes to fly towards commercial targets. But the BBC had an anxiety about this, not weirdly because of the idea of equating Islam with terrorism. They were worried that there's a kind of cultural taboo about dogs in Islam, and that they didn't want it to look provocative. But then the producer said to me, can you get round this in some way? Because we've already hired the dogs, and the plane's been made. You see that here. I mean, this was not cheap. There's going to be a little chihuahua in there in a balaclava. So the problem was it's very hard to actually find out what the definite position of Islam is on dogs. I read the Quran, and there's about as many pro-dogs bits as anti-dog bits, so that didn't really tell me anything. Then I thought, well, I'll be all right. I found this book, which is a real book. It's called Animals in Islamic Tradition and Muslim Cultures. I thought that, the answer must be in there. There's a 14-page chapter about dogs. I read that, and it ends with this genuine sentence. Long-held ethical norms may bear the weight of inertia, but they're not immutable. So thanks for that, Richard C. Foltz of Montreal University. The problem is, when you have these kind of issues, there isn't a central Islamic authority that you can refer the question up to. There's just lots of conflicting schools of thought. With Catholicism, it's very different. For example, if you want to do a sketch about hamsters in Catholicism, you can just write to the Vatican and go, what's your position on hamsters? And they go, they're great, we love them. As long as they believe in transubstantiation and original sin and don't use condoms. But there isn't an Islamic equivalent. It's very hard to find out exactly what the position is. Also, it's very difficult to do a joke about Islam because most people don't really know enough about it in any detail for you to do anything sophisticated. The options are limited, so you end up falling back on the most perfunctory and unpleasant and obvious stereotypes. It's very frustrating. I wrote to Abu Hamza about it. He's a prominent British Muslim. I wrote to Abu Hamza about dogs in Islam. But he didn't write back because he's got hooks for hands. He's got hooks for hands. Are you happy? Is that what you wanted? Are you satisfied now? He's got hooks for hands. What's he like? He's like a pirate or something, isn't he? Or a Bond villain. How does he open a tin? Is that what you wanted? So I said to the evangelist, can I have another guess? He said yes. I said, is the question, complete the name of this influential but little known early 1980s Scottish post-punk band, The Blank and Mary Chain. And he said, I don't know, I've not heard of them. And I said, surely it's obvious what they're called by now. And he said to me, oh, you obviously think it's very clever to be sarcastic, don't you? And I said, no. And he said, you were doing it then. And I said, no, I wasn't. You were. That went on for about 8 hours. You know what, right? None of that happened. I made it up. Well, it sort of happened. This guy came to my door 20 years ago, and he did say to me, the answer is Jesus. Now, what is the question? But I didn't say any of those things. I just went, oh, I don't know. I'm not interested, really. Then I went back to bed. Then over the next 2 decades, I gradually thought of a number of amusing things that I could have said. If I was really funny in real life, rather than only within this contrived and flattering TV environment. So that's all it was, just a joke, just a piece of nothing. Good night.
For me, Laurel and Hardy's Seaside Burkers is one of the great silent comedies. What I think is amazing is that Ollie had a sex change and converted to Islam in order to make that movie, and then had reverse gender realignment surgery after the shooting was over in order to become a man again. Then he renounced Islam and became an apostate with a price on his head, and then Islamic extremists targeted him for the rest of his life. Now, of course, today all that could be done with CGI. Or something. But they really had to do it. Superb.
Hey, you know you like silent comedy? Well, there's this thing now where the last 25 seconds of all BBC comedies, you can't really talk over them or have music or anything because they like to trail all the forthcoming programmes. So if you could sit quietly for about 25 seconds and you'll be squeezed over to one side or something, and someone with a regional accent will go on about forthcoming programmes. Is that right?